The hum of the repair bay filled the air as Jackson wiped his hands on a worn cloth, surveying the damaged battle suit before him. The armor belonged to one of the Zerani warriors stationed on Nexus Prime, the neutral space station where he worked. As a freelance mechanic, the suit was elegant yet fierce, crafted from a metal that shimmered with an otherworldly blue-green patina. Scorch marks and dents told the story of recent combat, and Jackson found himself wondering about the warrior. Who wore it? "Excuse me," came a soft voice from behind him. Jackson turned to see a tall figure standing in the doorway of his workshop. The Zerani woman was striking, with pale lavender skin that seemed to glow faintly in the artificial light. Her long, silver hair was pulled back in an intricate braid, and her eyes were the color of deep amethyst. She wore simple civilian clothes, but her posture spoke of military training. "You must be Zephyra," Jackson said, setting down his tools. "I'm Jackson. I'll be working on your armor today." She nodded silently, her expression unreadable. "How long will it take?" "Depends on the damage, a few hours, maybe more." He gestured to a chair near his workbench. "You're welcome to wait if you'd like. Most people prefer to know their gear is in good hands." Zephyra hesitated, then moved to the chair with fluid grace. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, watching as Jackson began his examination of the armor. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable, more like the quiet that comes when two people are focused on their respective tasks. Jackson had always been good with his hands. Growing up on the mining colony of Kepler-4, he'd learned to fix everything from atmospheric processors to personal communicators. When the chance came to work on Nexus Prime, he jumped at it. The station was a marvel of engineering, a place where dozens of species came together for trade, diplomacy, and the occasional uneasy peace negotiation. As he worked, carefully removing the damaged chest plate, Jackson found himself stealing glances at Zephyra. She sat motionless, her gaze fixed on something beyond the workshop's viewport. Her face was a mask of composure, but there was something in her eyes, a distant sadness that seemed to pull at his chest. "This is beautiful craftsmanship," he said, hoping to break the silence. "Zerani work?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was my grandmother's. She was a fleet commander." Jackson nodded, running his fingers along the intricate etchings that decorated the armor's surface. They weren't just decorative, they were functional, channeling energy and providing additional protection. "She must have been quite the warrior." "She was." Zephyra's voice caught slightly. "She died defending our homeworld during the Void War." The Void War. Jackson had heard stories, fragments of information about the conflict that had raged across several star systems before he was born. It had been brutal, leaving entire worlds scarred and populations displaced. He'd never pressed anyone for details. Some wounds were too deep for casual conversation. "I'm sorry," he said simply, continuing his work. "Loss like that, it stays with you." Zephyra didn't respond, but he noticed her hands tighten slightly in her lap. As he worked, Jackson found himself thinking about his own losses. His parents had died in a mining accident when he was 16, leaving him to care for his younger brother. The memory still ached, even after all these years. The work was intricate, requiring his full attention. The armor's systems were more complex than anything he'd worked on before, but he'd always been a quick learner. As he carefully repaired the damaged power coupling, he began to hum softly an old song his mother used to sing while she worked. It was then that he noticed it, a single, glistening drop rolling down Zephyr's cheek. She didn't move to wipe it away, didn't make a sound. She simply sat there, tears falling silently as she stared out at the stars beyond the viewport. Jackson's hands stilled, his breath catching in his throat. This proud warrior, this daughter of a fleet commander, was crying, and she was trying desperately to hide it. He looked away quickly, pretending he hadn't seen. His heart raced as he tried to process what he'd witnessed. Zephyra had been nothing but composed since she'd arrived, speaking in measured tones, moving with military precision. But beneath that carefully constructed exterior was someone hurting, someone who carried burdens too heavy for one person to bear. Jackson continued working, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the scars on the armor, The way Zephyra's eyes had grown distant when she mentioned her grandmother. This wasn't just about battle damage, this was about something deeper. Something that had been eating away at her for who knew how long. As he worked, more tears fell. Zephyra never acknowledged them, never broke her stoic facade. But they were there, silent testimony to a pain she couldn't voice. Jackson found himself working more carefully, more gently, as if the armor itself might feel his touch. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The repair bay grew quiet except for the soft sounds of Jackson's work and the distant hum of the station's systems. Other mechanics came and went, but Zephyra remained motionless, lost in whatever memories haunted her. Finally, Jackson set down his tools and sat back, studying the repaired chest plate. The damage was gone, the scorch marks buffed away, the dents hammered smooth. But as he looked at it, he realized that fixing the armor was only part of the job. The person who wore it, she needed something more than repairs. He glanced at Zephyra again. The tears had stopped, but her eyes remained distant, unfocused. She looked so alone, sitting there in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and machinery of his trade. It struck him that she might have been alone for a very long time. "Zephyra," he said softly, not wanting to startle her, "would you like some tea?" "I was about to make some for myself." She blinked, seeming to return from whatever far-off place her thoughts had taken her. Yes, thank you." As Jackson prepared the tea, he wondered what had brought this warrior to his workshop. What battles had she fought? What losses had she endured? And why did the sight of her tears make his chest ache with a sympathy he didn't fully understand? The tea was ready, and as he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed briefly. Her skin was warm, softer than he'd expected. She looked up at him then, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped. In her amethyst eyes, he saw not a warrior, but a woman who had carried her pain alone for far too long. "Thank you," she whispered, and in those 2 words, Jackson heard an entire universe of gratitude. The tea sat cooling between them as Jackson returned to his work on the armor's arm components. The silence had shifted, becoming less guarded, more contemplative. Zephyra held the cup in both hands, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. "You don't have to stay," Jackson said gently, adjusting a microcircuit with practiced precision. "This could take a while longer. I prefer to stay," she replied, her voice steadier now. "On my homeworld, we believe that armor holds the spirit of its battles. To leave it alone during repair would be disrespectful." Jackson nodded, understanding. "My father used to say something similar about the mining equipment. He'd spend hours with the machines, talking to them while he worked. My mother thought he was crazy, but the equipment never broke down under his care." "Your parents were miners?" "Yeah, on Kepler-4 for to be. It's not much to look at: tread dirt, acid rain, and mineral deposits as far as the eye can see. But it was home." He paused, remembering. "They died when I was 16. Tunnel collapse." Zephyra's grip on her cup tightened slightly. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago," Jackson said, though the words still carried weight. "I had to grow up fast, take care of my little brother. That's how I learned to fix things necessity." "Where's your brother now, Marcus?" "He's a pilot for the Trade Federation. Always said he wanted to see the universe." Jackson smiled faintly. "I guess he got his wish." As he worked, Jackson found himself stealing glances at Zephyra. She seemed more present now, less lost in whatever memories had haunted her earlier. The tear tracks on her cheeks had dried, but he couldn't forget the sight of her silent crying. "Can I ask you something?" he said carefully. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." She looked at him with those striking amethyst eyes. "What is it? Earlier, you seemed upset. I just wondered if everything's okay." Zephyra was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her tea. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Today marks 3 years since the Battle of Zorani Prime." Jackson's hands stilled. He'd heard fragments about that battle, a devastating conflict that had left the Zorani homeworld scarred and thousands dead. "Were you there?" "I was part of the defensive fleet," she said, her voice growing hollow. "We were supposed to protect the civilian evacuation ships, but the enemy had new weapons, technology we'd never seen before. They cut through our formations like we were nothing, She set down her cup with trembling hands. I watched 12 evacuation ships get destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of civilians' families. Children, elderly who couldn't fight. They died because we weren't strong enough, weren't fast enough. That wasn't your fault, Jackson said quietly, wasn't it? Her voice cracked. I was squadron leader. It was my job to protect them. Instead, I got to watch them burn while I sat helpless in my damaged fighter. Jackson set down his tools and turned to face her fully. How many did you save? What? The evacuation ships. How many made it out? Zephyr looked confused by the question. 37 ships escaped. But 37 ships full of people who are alive because of you and your squadron. Because you held the line long enough for them to jump to safety. Jackson's voice was firm but gentle. That's what matters. You don't understand, she said, standing abruptly. You weren't there. You didn't see their faces on the view screen. The terror in their eyes as the ships exploded. You didn't hear the children screaming over the calm channels. You're right. I wasn't there. But I know what it's like to carry guilt for something beyond your control. Jackson stood as well, his own voice heavy with memory, when the mine collapsed. I was supposed to be working that shift with my parents, but I was sick, so they covered for me. For years, I believed it should have been me down there instead of them. Zephyr stared at him, her composure cracking. How do you live with it? By remembering that guilt doesn't honor the dead. Living does. Making their sacrifice mean something does. He took a step closer. Those 37 ships, they're full of people who get to see their families again because of you. That's not nothing. That's everything. Tears began to fall again, but this time's effort didn't try to hide them. I haven't told anyone about that day. Not really. The debriefing. The reports, they're just facts and figures. But the truth of it, the weight of it, I've carried it alone. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Jackson said softly. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Why do you care? We barely know each other. Because pain is pain, regardless of what species feels it. And because no one should have to hurt alone. He gestured to the armor. This belonged to your grandmother, right? The fleet commander. Yes. What would she say if she knew you were carrying this guilt? Zephyr's breath caught. She would say that a warrior's duty is to the living, not the dead. That honor comes from protecting those who remain, not from mourning those who are gone. Smart woman, she was. She always said that the strongest warriors are those who can cry for the fallen and still stand, ready to fight for the living. Zephyr wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I haven't felt strong in a very long time. Strength isn't about not crying, Jackson said. It's about crying and still finding the courage to keep going. You're here, aren't you? Still fighting, still protecting. That's strength. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared pain and understanding settling between them. Jackson could see the walls Zephyr had built around herself, the same walls he'd built after his parents' death, but walls that kept pain and also kept connection out. I should let you get back to work, she said finally. Actually, I could use a break. Would you like to see the observation deck? It has a good view of the nebula. She hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. As they walked through the station's corridors, Jackson noticed how other inhabitants looked at them, curious glances, some approving, others wary. Humans and Zorani didn't often socialize, despite the peace treaties. Too much history, too much pain on both sides. The observation deck was nearly empty. Just a few traders discussing cargo manifests in hushed tones. The viewport stretched across the entire wall, offering a spectacular view of the Crimson Nebula. Streams of red and gold gas swirled in cosmic currents, illuminated by the light of distant stars. It's beautiful, Zephyr said, pressing her hand against the transparent aluminum. I come here sometimes when I need to think, Jackson said. Something about the scale of it puts things in perspective. My grandmother used to say that the universe is too large for any one person's pain to matter, but that's what makes it precious, the fact that it's small and brief and ours. They stood side by side, watching the nebula's slow dance. Jackson was acutely aware of Zephyr's presence beside him, the way she'd begun to relax, the way her breathing had steadied. The earlier tears had washed away some of the rigid control she'd maintained. Thank you. She said quietly. For what? For seeing me. Not the warrior, not the alien, just me. She turned to look at him. I haven't felt seen in a very long time. Their eyes met, and Jackson felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't just about shared pain anymore. There was something else growing between them. Something that made his heart race and his hands tremble. Zephyra, he began. Not sure what he wanted to say. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. They were from different worlds, different species, carrying different burdens. But in that moment, watching the nebula paint them both in shades of gold and crimson, none of that seemed to matter. This is complicated, Jackson said. Very complicated, she agreed. We should probably be careful. Probably. Neither of them moved away. The days following their conversation on the observation deck passed in a blur of stolen moments and careful distances. Jackson found himself finishing the armor repairs with meticulous attention, taking longer than necessary to ensure every component was perfect. Zephyra returned daily, ostensibly to check on the progress, but they both knew she came for something else entirely. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. She told him about her childhood on Zerani Prime, about the floating cities that danced among the clouds, about the way the twin suns painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. He shared stories of the mining colony, of the harsh beauty of red desert landscapes, of the way the artificial atmosphere made everything taste slightly metallic. You know, Jackson said one afternoon as he calibrated the armor's power distribution system, people are starting to talk. Zephyra looked up from the technical manual she'd been reading. What kind of talk? The curious kind. A human mechanic and a Zerani warrior spending time together isn't exactly common. He kept his voice light, but there was an undercurrent of concern. Tobias mentioned it yesterday. He's the docking supervisor, good guy, but he notices things. What did he say? Nothing hostile, just interested. Jackson set down his tools and turned to face her. He asked if we were friends, are we? The question carried more weight than it should have. Jackson met her gaze, feeling that familiar flutter in his chest. I don't know. What do you call it when you can't stop thinking about someone, when their pain becomes your pain, and their smile makes your whole day brighter? Zephyra's breath caught. Dangerous. Yeah, he said softly. That's what I thought too. The workshop door chimed, and they both turned to see a figure entering. The newcomer was Zerani, tall and imposing, with the bearing of military authority. His skin was a deeper shade of lavender than Zephyra's, and his eyes held the hard gleam of someone who'd seen too much combat. Captain Voss, Zephyra said, standing quickly. Her entire demeanor shifted, becoming formal and distant. Zephyra. The captain's voice was gravelly, carrying the weight of command. His gaze swept over the workshop, taking in the scattered tools, the nearly completed armor, and Jackson standing beside the workbench. I trust the repairs are progressing satisfactorily. Yes, sir, the human mechanic has been very thorough. Jackson bristled slightly at being referred to as the human mechanic, but he kept his expression neutral. Captain, the armor should be ready by tomorrow morning. Voss approached the workbench, examining the repairs with a critical eye. Impressive work, though I must say, I'm surprised to find you here, Zephyra. Surely you have other duties to attend to? I wanted to ensure the armor was being handled properly, she replied, her voice carefully controlled. Of course, Voss's tone suggested he didn't entirely believe her. Walk with me. We have matters to discuss. Zephyra glanced at Jackson, and he saw something apologetic in her eyes. I'll return tomorrow for the final fitting, of course, Jackson said, trying to keep his voice professional. I'll have everything ready. As they left, Jackson caught fragments of their conversation in the corridor. Voss's voice was low but sharp. Dangerous precedent, inappropriate fraternization. Your reputation. The door closed, cutting off the rest. Jackson stood alone in his workshop, feeling the weight of unspoken warnings. He knew Voss was right. Of course, whatever was growing between him and Zephyra was complicated, potentially dangerous for both of them, but that didn't make it any easier to ignore. That evening, Jackson found himself in the station's cantina, nursing. a synthetic ale, and trying to lose himself in the ambient noise of conversation and laughter. The place was crowded, filled with traders, diplomats, and off-duty station personnel. The lighting was dim, casting everyone in warm, amber tones. Mind if I sit? Jackson looked up to see Tobias approaching, carrying the drinks. The docking supervisor was a heavy-set man with graying hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who knew everyone's business, but was decent enough to keep most of it to himself. Sure, Jackson said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Tobias sat down heavily, pushing one of the drinks toward Jackson. You look like a man with something on his mind. Just thinking about work. You huh? Tobias took a sip of his drink, studying Jackson with shrewd eyes. Would this work happen to involve a certain Zerani warrior? Jackson's jaw tightened. I don't know what you mean. Look, kid, I've been on this station for 15 years. I've seen every kind of relationship you can imagine: human Centauri, Altarian vegan, even a few human AI pairings that worked out better than most biological ones. Tobias leaned forward. But I've never seen a human and a Zerani try to make it work. There's nothing to make work, Jackson said quietly. We're just friends. Friends don't look at each other the way you two do. Tobias's voice was gentle but firm. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Jackson could answer, a commotion erupted near the cantina's entrance. Voices were raised in argument, and Jackson turned to see a group of human traders confronting a lone Zerani. The Zerani was young, probably barely out of adolescence, with the pale skin and uncertain bearing of someone far from home. Should have stayed in your own sector, one of the traders was saying, his voice slurred with alcohol. Nobody wants your kind here. Please, the young Zerani said, his voice trembling. I'm just trying to find transport to the outer rim. My family, your family can rot for all I care. Another trader spat. You people killed enough of ours during the war. Jackson felt his chest tighten with anger. He started to stand, but Tobias caught his arm. Easy. Kid, not your fight. It is my fight, Jackson said, shaking off Tobias's grip. It's everyone's fight. He crossed the cantina quickly, positioning himself between the traders and the frightened Zerani. Is there a problem here? The lead trader, a burly man with scarred hands, looked Jackson up and down dismissively. Nothing that concerns you, mechanic. Actually, it does. This is a neutral station. Everyone's welcome here, regardless of species. Says who? Says the Unity Accords that keep this place running. Jackson's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched into fists. Walk away. The trader stepped closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. Or what? You'll fix us to death. The cantina had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Jackson could feel the tension crackling in the air. The old hatreds and fears that peace treaties couldn't simply erase. Is there a problem here? The voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. Jackson turned to see Zephyra approaching, her bearing regal despite her civilian clothes. The traders stepped back instinctively, recognizing a trained warrior when they saw one. No problem. The lead trader mumbled, just having a conversation. I see. Zephyra's eyes swept over the group, her gaze as cold as vacuum. Perhaps you should continue your conversation elsewhere. The traders grumbled but began to disperse. As they left, the lead trader shot Jackson a look of pure venom. This isn't over, mechanic. Once they were gone, Zephyra turned to the young Zerani. Are you injured? No, thank you. Both of you. The youth's voice was shaky but grateful. I should go. After the young Zerani left, Zephyra and Jackson found themselves alone near the cantina's entrance. The normal bustle of conversation had resumed, but Jackson could still feel curious eyes upon them. Thank you, Zephyra said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. She looked at him with something like wonder. You really believe that, don't you? That we're all just people, regardless of what we look like or where we come from. Don't you? I want to. But it's hard when there's so much history, so much pain on both sides. She gestured toward the spot where the confrontation had occurred. My people have their own prejudices, their own fears. There are those who would see our friendship as a betrayal, like Captain Voss, among others. She was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at him. He warned me today, said I was playing with fire, that I could be reassigned if I'm not careful. Jackson felt something cold settle in his stomach. And what did you tell him? That you were simply a skilled mechanic doing excellent work on my armor. Her smile was sad. He didn't believe me. Neither do I. They stood in silence, the weight of their situation settling between them, round them. The station hummed with life, dozens of species coexisting in a carefully maintained peace. But that peace was fragile, held together by treaties and mutual necessity rather than genuine understanding. This is impossible, Zephyra said finally. Probably. We're from different worlds, different species. There are people on both sides who would see us as traitors. I know. It could ruin both our careers. You could lose your position here. I could lose my commission. I know that too. She stepped closer, and he could see the conflict in her amethyst eyes. Then why does it feel so right? Jackson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he gently took her hand in his. Her skin was warm, soft, and he could feel the slight tremor in her fingers. Because maybe, he said softly, the heart doesn't care about politics or species or what other people think. Maybe it just knows what it knows. And what does your heart know, Jackson? He looked into her eyes, seeing his own feelings reflected there. That I'm falling in love with you, against all logic, against all reason, against everything that says it's impossible. Jackson, I know it's crazy. I know it's complicated. But I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting to see you smile. Can't stop wanting to be the one who makes you feel safe. He squeezed her hand gently. What does your heart know? Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time they weren't. Tears of grief, that I'm already in love with you. That for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not alone. She brought their joined hands to her chest. That I would rather have one moment of this truth than a lifetime of safe lies. The admission hung between them like a bridge. They'd finally decided to cross. They were still from different worlds, still facing impossible odds, still risking everything for something that might not survive the pressures arrayed against it. But in that moment, none of that mattered. They had found each other across the void of space and species, and that was enough. For now.